Well, hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Marc Messinger, and this is episode 1, When Life Breaks You. It's a first part of a 4-part recording of A Calm Place. And if you're listening to this, let me say something clearly right up front. You didn't end up here by accident. You're here because something in your life has shifted, broken open, and you're not sure how to stand inside it yet. You know, maybe nothing looks broken to people from the outside, but inside, everything feels unsteady. And maybe your days are filled with decisions you never asked to make, conversations you never wanted to have, and responsibilities you were never prepared for. Maybe you wake up already tired, not just physically, but emotionally, bracing yourself for another day of just kind of holding it all together. Or maybe something happens so suddenly, so completely that it knocked the breath out of you, and you're still trying to understand how the world kept moving when yours stopped. And if you're listening and thinking, I don't even recognize my life anymore, you're not weak. You're human. And if you give me just the next 12 minutes, I won't promise to fix anything, but I will give you a philosophy, something to steady, to hold on to. Think of it like this. You're caught in a sea, in a storm, and you can't see the shoreline. What you need first isn't speed or answers. What you need is direction. And this 4-part series is meant to be that point of light, a lighthouse, something you can orient toward when everything else feels chaotic and overwhelming. You may have found this recording on my website, mylifetransitionsguide.com, or maybe someone quietly mentioned it to you, a friend, a social worker, nurse, a chaplain, and simply said, hey, take a few minutes. You know, this man might get you. And that's exactly how I hope these recordings travel. Person to person, when somebody needs a calm voice, more than another set of instructions. This is the first recording in a short series called A Calm Place. And at its core, the reason I wrote this, it's a series that explores one question most people are never taught how to answer. What do you do when life changes without your consent? And how do you find your footing again? You know, losing control is what this is really about at its core. And losing control isn't about the obvious things like what's in your bank account, or when people, are talking to you about losing control, they often point to what's visible. I've lost control of the paperwork, the decisions, the responsibilities that are suddenly piling up. But that's not what hurts the most. What really shakes us is losing our sense of direction, the feeling that your life has slipped out of your hands, out of your control, that you're reacting instead of getting to choose. Also that you don't know what matters anymore or where to put your energy first. What I hear most often from people isn't, I'm overwhelmed. It's this, Mark, I am so lost. I feel completely out of control. Or I don't even know if I'm going to be able to survive this. So let me say this clearly, and I want you to hear it emotionally, not just logically. There is nothing wrong with you. This is what it feels like when life changes without your consent. And there were many times that I lost control without my consent. And the first time I lost control was when I was 16. And I'm not going to get into the entire story, the medical diagnosis today. That's a story for another time. But what matters here is the experience. I lost my hearing at age 16, and then I lost my sight. And I moved from hospital rooms to rehab centers, from Marshfield Clinic and up to Mayo Clinic, surrounded by uncertainty, fear, and questions no one could fully answer. What stayed with me wasn't the procedures or the medicines or the loneliness and the several months, almost half a year, being in different facilities. It was the feeling that I was young, I was scared, and I was absolutely powerless. And when I was up at Mayo Clinic, I watched adults, men who had lived full lives. Many of them were World War II vets, and they were facing the same fear I was facing. losing control. They were losing control of their body, both mentally and physically. And I realized that moment quietly shaped everything that came after for myself spending those months because I learned something during my early diagnosis. We can't control any outcomes in our worlds, but we can learn how to steady ourselves when life turns without permission. Several years later, after I got better and after I got married and after I was a parent, not for the first or second time, but for the third time, years later, I felt that loss again, but this time it was as a parent. Our daughter was diagnosed with central core muscular dystrophy around 10 years old. And I remember sitting in that room as the doctor spoke, watching the clock continue to tick and tick while time stood still. And every instinct in me wanted to trade places with her, to carry it for her, because I myself was sick in high school, but I couldn't change the diagnosis. And so we learn how to live with it. At the time, I thought I was simply raising a strong daughter, because that's what good parents do. And I didn't realize I was preparing her for how strong she would need to be later for what was coming at far too young an age. And I'm grateful now that my wife and I were able to be the caregiver and the parents to her in our home, that she saw strength modeled, not as perfection, but as perseverance, because I had lived it myself. Because strength isn't something you explain, it's something you live and hope people will absorb it around you. But if you have been a caregiver or are one right now, you know one thing: caregiving doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down slowly. It's the vigilance, the mental load you carry everywhere, the exhaustion no one sees. Caregivers don't collapse. They fade. And caregiving changes you permanently, just like loss does also. And that really was the third storm that changed everything in my world. My third storm came when my wife, Catherine, my partner for 34 years, was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, terminal. It was July of 2020, and the world was already unraveling all around us. There was bureaucracy and paperwork. Doctors and nurses were fighting battles of their own, not just against illness, but against layers and isolation brought on by COVID. And many days it felt like my wife and I were fending for ourselves in very unfamiliar waters. And it was during that season for the first time that I consciously used the philosophy I'm about to share with you. My wife and I set small, intentional goals across the 4 foundational areas of our life, not to control the outcomes, but to give ourselves a true north, something to steady, to point us in choppy, unpredictable waters. She was told by the first doctor that she may have only 2 to 3 months to live, and we could not accept that diagnosis. So we got second opinions, and they were correct. It was terminal, but she didn't live 2 to 3 months. She lived 23 meaningful, glorious months where she had complete control. And together during those 23 months, we set 37 small goals. And she was able to complete 36 of them. But eventually, she entered hospice in our home. For us, it was the right choice for her comfort, for our children, and so she could be in a place that felt safe. She died in our bed in May of 2022, with our 3 children and me holding her, our dog lying quietly at her side. And it was a beautiful death, and it was far too soon. And I really thought, what more can life throw at me? I thought that was the end of the storm. But what I didn't realize, I wasn't in a storm. I was in the quiet middle of the hurricane. I was in the quiet part where the real destruction hadn't shown itself yet. In the months that followed, I lost not just my wife, but my sense of purpose. Our children and I were changed forever. We were lost. We were scared. We were angry, and many of us were in denial and trying to understand a life that no longer made sense. You know, it was months later that I really returned to the framework, the same philosophy that I've been using again and again throughout my life. And I had to be honest about where I was. I wasn't rebuilding. I wasn't thriving. I was just surviving. And that honesty became the first rung on the ladder back up. Looking back, every storm that broke the same parts of my life have always been the same. My 4 life pillars. They are your health, your family, your purpose, and your finances. And I didn't build this framework because I wanted to. I built it because I needed one. Those 4 areas became anchors, and together they formed a compass. You know, life moves in stages, especially during crisis. You go from having a stable life to maybe having those significant moments. Ben, as Mike Tyson famously said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, when that punch in the face moment happens, you fall into survival mode. And most people aren't failing. They're just asking too much of themselves too soon. And the real question isn't, how do I fix everything? It's, where am I right now? And what's the next small step that I can take? And that's why this series exists. This episode is about orientation, and the next 3 will give you structure. In episode 2, I'll walk you through the 4 life pillars, not as a checklist, but as a way to understand where you are today and where your energy belongs first. In episode 3, we'll talk about survival, stability, and significance and why timing matters. And in the final episode, I'll give you a simple visual guide, a compass, to help you set true north goals again. You can find that guide at mylifetransitionsguide.com. But for now, hear this. You are not broken. You are not behind. All those little moments. And you don't have to navigate this season alone. If all you did today was listen, that's enough. It's a good life.